Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for joining the webinar. My name is Julia. I'm a scientific engagement manager at protocols.io, and today I'll be presenting our webinar on getting credit for method development. So I've already clicked to start recording the webinar, so all registrants will receive a link to the recording as well as these slides after the webinar. Feel free to share that around your organizations as well with other people who want to learn about protocols.io. Closed captioning should also be enabled for those who would like to use it. And at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. Feel free to pop your questions into the Q&A box or into the chat during the webinar, but we'll answer them at the end. And we do also have other webinars and one-on-one demos that you can request as well. And I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the webinar. So we've got a few topics to go through today. So I'll talk a little bit more broadly around methods sharing, and then I'll talk about protocols.io and the different methods of publishing protocols on protocols.io so you can get credit and recognition for them. Part of that will be talking about linking your protocols to research papers and how you can get your protocols peer reviewed. We'll have a quick demo at the end, or we'll jump out of the slides onto the protocols.io platform to show you how to import a protocol, add various bells and whistles, and then publish it as well. So to start off, we're going to go a little bit back in history. And what this slide is talking about is that it's actually really only been a focus recently on publishing methods. So the journal Nature Methods started only in 2004. And at the time, there was actually a lot of skepticism, even within the kind of nature publishing group around launching Nature Methods. And some of the reasons for that skepticism were that, Springer Nature publishes research. No one's going to read just methods. And that it would kind of be impossible to fill a journal's paper with only methods. But with the benefit of hindsight, we know now that Nature Methods was a huge success, and it continues to be. But I think it's really interesting to think about the skepticism that there was at the time of giving methods independent credit, and that was happening kind of as recently as 2004. And I think when we look again now is that, this dismissive nature of methods seems a bit irrational when we know that publishing methods can be extremely impactful. So if we look here on the right, this is a write-up that was, so initially Nature looked at the top 10 cited papers back in 2014, and then there was an update to that this year. So this is that publication. And what we can see is that all of the most cited research papers, going back to the early 1900s, are methods papers. And they're also largely biological laboratory techniques. And so again, this is just another example of the fact that people really value methods and they are impactful. And we should be finding ways to share those with the scientific community. So that kind of shift in how people see and value methods that kind of initially happened in publishing, we now see mirrored in the open science movement. So historically, open science has focused very heavily on open access publications, open data, open code, but there's been very little focus on open methods. But really, if you're publishing your data and results, they can only be reused if you're also publishing and making open the methods that were used to generate that data. So now, luckily, we're seeing a lot more awareness about methods sharing. And with that, there's a lot of different infrastructure. One of that is protocols.io to support the sharing of methods. So if we think about how methods are shared kind of within the recent history, they have largely been in supplementary information of papers. And when I say sharing methods, it's detailed methods that are beyond a couple of sentences that you might put in the materials and methods section of your paper. So if someone wants to share a really long, detailed protocol, they might do that in the supplementary information, or they might do that in their individual lab website. And so we can see some nice kind of protocol sharing champions here who have been very kind to make the protocols used in their lab public on their website. And so while these are really great first steps, there are some drawbacks to these approaches. So one of them is that if we think about supplementary information, you're sharing those methods in the form of static PDF documents, which are not built for protocols and methods, and they're very kind of in a very unstructured format. So there's no kind of standard format for sharing those methods. And lastly, they are not discoverable there. So supplementary information is largely not text mined. So if you are kind of doing a search for particular information, it would not be including the text within the supplementary information in that search. And then when people share on their lab websites, there is a lot of kind of time and effort required from the lab to get started, to set this up on their website, and then also maintain that. And then there's also the issue that people, people move universities, people move labs, and there's an issue with kind of persistent links. So if someone cites a protocol here, and then, a research group moves to another university, or the university changes kind of the link structure of their website, the links become broken. And then over time, we're losing that connection and we can't find the science anymore. So really, nowadays, we're seeing a lot more use of repositories, and the aim of that is to solve that problem. And so this is kind of introduces the concept of modular publishing. And this is where you have multiple kind of discrete research outputs that can be published in fit for purpose repositories, and then they can be linked to your research paper as appropriate. And what this means is that we can move away from the more traditional models where a paper is published and that is the main measure of success in research. And then with the modular publishing, it's a lot more sustainable and suitable to the way that science is done now. So all of these outputs kind of along the edge can be considered as legitimate and impactful ways of demonstrating one's contribution to research. So that brings me to protocols.io and the concept of protocols and methods as kind of discrete, publishable, citable research outputs that you can use and get credit for their development. So if you're in this webinar, you probably already know a little bit about protocols.io, and that we are a workflow tool and also a repository for the open sharing of methods and protocols. So as a refresher for anyone who isn't familiar, they're the two sides, which I just mentioned. So in our open access repository, you can publish and discover detailed scientific protocols. We have over 24,000 public protocols on the platform. Then there's also the private side of the platform where teams use protocols.io to kind of document their work, develop, share, optimize protocols privately before they publish, or if they choose not to publish at all. So because this webinar is around getting credit for method development, we're going to focus today more on the open and publishing side of the platform. So if we think about those kind of static PDF documents, such as supplementary information, protocols.io, when you share on protocols.io, it's not just a Word or PDF document. It's in an adaptable and interactive format that can be built upon and reused by others. And when other people find your work and build upon and reuse it, that's one of the ways that you can demonstrate that you're developing, quality, robust protocols that people in the community are using, and that you can then demonstrate the impact of your science, and then get credit for developing it in the first place. So, what I'll do now is run through a few of the publishing options on protocols.io, because the platform is very flexible and there are several ways that you can go about it. So what I will say is that if you do want to kind of know more information specifically about linking protocols to research papers, I'd recommend you check out this link here, which takes you to one of the pages in our Help Center, which talks about all of the different options that are available, why you might want to use one or the other. But I'll kind of go through it at a high level today. So on protocols.io, there are two main ways to publish protocols. So one of them is as a standalone method. You have a method that you've developed. Maybe it's really simple. It's not linked to kind of research that you're publishing, but you think it might be useful to the community and you just kind of want to share it with others for the sake of transparency. So you can simply publish a protocol on the platform. It will receive a DOI and people can cite it. So that's one option. But what we see a lot of people do is, because people don't just create methods in isolation, there's obviously other outputs that come along with that, is they like to link those protocols and methods to research papers. And so that's the other way that people publish on the platform. So one of the options is directly citing the protocols.io protocol DOI in your research paper. And really, this is best when you're publishing a protocol that was kind of relevant and to your paper's findings and was used in the collection of that data. So that's very easy to do. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but you can reserve a DOI on protocols.io that you can put in your research paper before it's published. The other option is one of our method and protocol journal partnerships. And so, so these two sections down here involve getting your protocols.io protocols peer reviewed. So these two options up the top are more analogous to publishing a preprint. We moderate the protocols, filtering out pseudoscience or spam, but these protocols don't go through kind of a rigorous peer review process, where these bottom two would. So if we have partnerships with various method and protocol journals, which I'll show a little bit later, and we'd recommend kind of pursuing this path if you're already planning on submitting a paper to one of the journals that we're partnered with, or you have a protocol that you think would be suitable to those journals. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. And then the last option, so this one's relatively new, is an integration that we currently have with Nature Cell Biology. So our long-term plan is to kind of integrate with lots of different Springer Nature journals into their submission systems. Currently, we have that with Nature Cell Biology, and it's kind of a work in progress with other journals. So if you are planning on submitting to Nature Cell Biology, you can kind of consider this option. But for the rest of the webinar, I'll really focus on these two middle options here, which are probably used by most people on protocols.io. I quickly show this because there are a few different ways to publish on the platform. So one of them is kind of directly publishing. The other one is reserving a DOI. There's also posting a draft. And you can see the kind of explanations for these on the slide. I probably won't go into it too much more detail today. So first of all is directly citing a DOI. And so going back to modular publishing, this is what that could look like. So we have here on the right a Nature Communications paper that was published and the data availability statement that goes along with it. And so we can see in that data availability statement, they have published all of the relevant outputs into the repositories that suit them. So we've got the expression constructs on AdGene, the protocols on protocols.io, and the molecular structure on the protein databank. And so the person that's responsible for those specific research outputs can get the appropriate credit for them. And what I do want to highlight here is that we really encourage people to put that information in a data availability statement if that's available, because the data availability statement is often kind of open access along with the abstract, things like that. And so even if the paper is kind of paywalled, people can see that your methods are on protocols.io, and then they can go and access them on protocols.io where they are open access. And so this is kind of looking deeper at this paper here. And so this is a comparison of the paper itself and then one of the protocols that was listed in that data availability statement. And so what we can see is that because these are distinct outputs, they have distinct author lists. So here's Kelsey Ramirez. She was fourth author on the paper, but she was first author on this protocol. And so she can take that protocol, say, this was a research output that I was responsible for. She could put it on her CV and she can track the metrics associated with that specific output and, take ownership of it. And then this highlights what I was talking about before. So this is this different paper. This is Nature Cell Biology. So this is a subscription-based journal. So this journal or this paper, sorry, has this protocol associated with it. So even though the paper is subscription-based, the protocol on protocols.io will be open. And so those methods are always accessible and findable. So next, I'll talk about our various partnerships with journals where you can get your protocols peer-reviewed as part of that. So you can see in this image here, so this is an up-to-date list as of September of all the journals that we do have partnerships with. And what I'll say with this kind of method of publishing and linking to papers is that I think the key, whether you should pursue this path or not, is if you have a research paper that you think you can publish in one of these journals. And I think, as I said previously, that really depends on the guidelines of the journals and what kind of publications they accept. So I'd really encourage you to kind of review the different journals and review what's needed to publish in those journals to know if this is an option that you can pursue. But there's lots of people who've gone through this process. So these are some testimonials of authors who've gone through this process. These are all authors of lab protocol papers via PLOS ONE. And you can see that going through that process, they found it really impactful. And then these quotes actually come from a series that a former colleague of mine, Gabriel Gask, did where he would interview authors who've gone through this process. And so you can access those interviews at this link here if you want to hear more from the authors. And so this is what it looks like. So for example, this is our partnership with the +1 Lab Protocol Journal. And so this is the journal, and you can see people link to the protocols.io protocol. They've done it here in the materials and methods. And then on +1, there's also a button at the top where you can click to see the protocol, and it will take you to protocols.io. And then on the protocols.io site, we can see at the top here that this protocol was associated with a paper published in +1. That link will take you back to the paper. And then there's also a peer review badge that appears on that protocol, so people know that this protocol has actually been peer reviewed. Similar situation in BMC methods, so they can put the DOI to the protocol in the materials and methods, and then on protocols.io, there's the badge and the link back to BMC methods. So it's really kind of a bi-directional link between the paper and the protocol. So if you do want to hear a bit more about getting your protocols peer reviewed, we did run a session at Love Methods Week. This was, I think, last year now? No, earlier this year in February. And so as part of that, we interviewed editors from some of their journals, so Nature Protocols, BMC Methods, and +1, to see what's required from authors to go through that process. And then we heard from some authors as well. So you can scan that QR code or click the link after you receive the slides to view that. I'm now going to do a quick kind of case study to show you an example of what that looks like and what the impact can be for you. So this is Jacopo Zerazzoni, and this is the protocol that he published on the platform. And so you can kind of access those there if you'd like. And going through this process really allowed him to kind of enhance his research profile. And I'll show you how he was able to do that. So before I kind of talk about what the impact of publishing that protocol was, I'll show you really what's possible when you publish on protocols.io. And that is that the evolution of a method over time is transparent and trackable throughout that research and publishing process. So this is the timeline of the publications that are associated with this protocol that I just showed. And so we can see that version 1 of the protocols.io protocol was published in kind of October 2020. And so that means that he was able to publish that protocol, kind of link to it on social media, share it with other people, and start kind of gathering maybe feedback from the community and start gathering metrics to show the impact of that work. Then he made the decision to publish that protocol alongside a +1 journal article. So before that +1 journal article was published, he was able to update this original protocol by publishing a new version on protocols.io. So that was done about 6 months later in April 2021, right before the +1 publication came out. But you can see these were kind of published around the same time. And then additionally, following the +1 publication, as further improvements are made to that protocol, and an additional version can be published the following year for kind of, any updates or improvements that were made. And then if we look to the future, he could publish additional versions, or we can see that other people on protocols.io can create their own forks or private versions of that protocol and then build upon it themselves. And so these are some quotes from the interview that we did with him, and how going through this process was great for his kind of visibility and the opportunities that it gave him as an early career researcher. So he published this protocol, I think, right at the end of his PhD. And it was, I think really, he got a lot of really great feedback from his PhD examiners, and also the community about that process and protocol. So we can see here on this slide, it gave him a lot of recognition, and he was actually invited to, lectures and practical sessions based on that protocol, because of that publication. And relating to that as well, all of the protocols on protocols.io have metrics associated with them. So this is a different protocol in this example. I've taken this slide from another presentation, but he can track the kind of the views, the bookmarks, and the forks and citations associated with that protocol. And then another really nice example is the kind of visibility that you get across disciplines. So one of the things that Jacopo talked about was that in archaeology, which this protocol is from, a lot of research is very specific to a certain time period in history, and a certain region of the world. And that's usually what people focus on, and that's what his PhD focused on. And so when you publish work, if you're looking at a certain time period, a certain region, people would maybe be less likely to find research if they're not looking for it, because they might be searching for a specific time period. They might not find a useful method that's associated with another time period. And so when he added this protocol and this methodological aspect to his research, that protocol was able to go beyond the boundaries of time period and beyond the boundaries of region, because that protocol was relevant for all areas. And so that meant he could really show a kind of greater impact to the field of archaeology. And he found that really beneficial. And that is another reason that we encourage people to publish on protocols.io, in that it can increase the discoverability and reuse of your research because it can be findable across disciplines. So this is another nice example. If we look here at the paper and the associated protocol with that paper, we can see that the paper is very focused on kind of the impact of that science. So this is the study, and the study was on three-spine sickleback parasite. So that's a fish parasite. So people who find this paper might be people who research fish parasites. However, the protocol within that paper is a kind of generic RNA extraction protocol, which would be beneficial to researchers working on all different types of cells. And then this is a perfect example of that. So we can see this was an exchange on kind of X, formerly Twitter, where someone was looking for an RNA extraction protocol for primary cortical neuron cultures. And would they be looking at journals on fish parasites? Maybe, maybe not. But because it was published on protocols.io, this researchers can say, hey, check out this kind of basic trizol protocol. That might be useful for you. And so it means that more people can kind of find your protocols and then also find your papers, because there is that link from the protocol back to the paper. And then lastly, this is another example of how publishing on protocols.io can really connect you with other researchers. So this is Professor Luciano Marilotto, and he said that 80% of his recent collaborations were a direct result of sharing publicly on Protocol Studio. So there is a lot of visibility that comes from sharing on the platform. People find these protocols independently of research papers. And so really it's another avenue for people to find you and find your work. So now I will hop out of the slides and onto the platform. I will stop sharing for a moment. Okay. All right, now we're in protocols.io. So if you create an account, you'll have your private workspace. And if you want to publish, you can start a few different ways. So you can go to new and just create a new blank protocol. But what we'd recommend you try if you already have kind of the steps or protocol drafted somewhere else in a Word document, a PDF, maybe sometimes even if you take a picture of things that you've written down, you can import that into protocols.io using this button here. And so we have our AI Protocolify importer that will convert these files into that dynamic stepwise format on protocols.io. So you can upload a file here. Excuse me. Or you can also drag and drop a file into the file manager. And if you click on it and click this button, you can create a new protocol from this file. So I've already gone through that process for this example protocol. And so if we take this PDF, this is what it looks like. So we can see, there's titles, kind of authors, affiliation, abstract. These are, I think, are materials, and then the steps start down here. So that's what it looks like in the PDF. And if I open up this this document right here, which is the kind of Protocolify output that it gives you after importing, this is what it looks like. So we can see that if we go down to the description, it's put the abstract in the right spot. It's put in the different authors. It's put the materials into the materials tab. Make sure to always kind of check the different tabs. And then we've got our steps put in that structured stepwise protocols.io format. And what I would recommend you doing is, so after you import a protocol, always check that it's imported everything correctly. But then also, if you go through that and take that next step to make this protocol a little bit more readable and understandable and user-friendly, that can go a long way to improving the reproducibility of that protocol. And so you can do that by including various components. So for example, with this step one here, I know that a piranha solution, it's very strong acid. You'd probably want to be careful working with it. So I can go in and I can add in a little safety information and say, warning, and say that solution is corrosive. Maybe I could put in a link to a material safety data sheet as well if I wanted to do that. And then similarly, if we look at step two here, part of that is kind of instructional information. And we have a little bit of a note here as well about how you can store those reaction chambers. So I can put kind of extra tips and tricks information into a note. So I can put that there. And maybe I just want to collapse that as well. And I'll show you what that looks like. So you can go through each of the steps and kind of add in various things. So amounts, concentrations, temperature. You can explore the different components that are available. And then if I go in and view, we can see that it's collapsed that and we can see that information. And so I've gone through and I've imported this protocol, but this was a previously published protocol on the platform. And we can see actually I've got an example of what the published protocol looks like and what the authors did to that protocol. And so that's shown here. So this, I've created a fork from this published protocol, and we can see the authors have done exactly that. So they've added in some notes, and we can see they've added in the timers, and they've highlighted the different concentrations. They've added in our different icons here, centrifugation, pipetting. They've added in the timings of how long each step might take. So you can go through and add all that information to make your protocol a lot more usable. And then after you've done that, you can, when you're ready, publish it on the platform. And so you can see now that I'm viewing the protocol, there's these various options along the top here. So if I wanted to publish immediately, I could click this button. And it's a short kind of 5-step process that I'll need to go through. You can see what information we ask for, and then you will get a DOI for that protocol, and it will be publicly available on the platform. So that was kind of a quick guide on how to get started and get your protocol published on the platform. I'll go ahead and hop back into the slides because I think we've got a little bit of time left where I'll go through some questions that people ask us about publishing. Am I sharing the right screen? Let me see. Okay, I think I am. All right. So what some people ask us is, I've published however many papers in the last 5 years, and I actually have methods that are associated with those papers that I could share in more detail on Protocol Studio. Is that okay? Am I allowed to do that? How can I do that? So absolutely. As I said, people publish protocols standalone on the platform, so you can do that no problem. But if you do want to link them to those previously already published research papers, you can do that as well. And so if you are in the protocol editor, you can go to the description tab, and there will be a section that you can put in the manuscript citation. And so then you can put in the citation to your previously published manuscript. And once that protocol is published, that's what it would look like on the published protocol. And it would be in the metadata section, the metadata tab along the top of the protocol. What we also see people do is they want to make it a little bit more obvious. They will put it in the abstract. So it will appear right at the top of the protocol and say, this protocol was associated with work published in X journal, and link out to that, the journal article. But I think an important thing to kind of highlight here is that if you do go through this process, it's a one-directional process. So people will be able to find your paper from the protocol, but because the paper is already published and it doesn't link to the protocol, people won't be able to arrive at your paper and then know that the protocols.io protocols are available. And that's why we encourage people to think about that before they're publishing their papers, so they can include that protocols.io DOI within their research paper. Something else that people ask is, I have a method that I use in my lab. It works really well for me. I want to share it, but I didn't develop it by myself. It was based on someone else's method. It was based on a previously published method, so I'm not sure if I want to put it on the platform. So our stance is that, we will accept it and allow you to publish it on the platform, but as with any piece of research, you should provide a citation and credit to the original developers. Um, so this is an example of where someone's done that. So you can check this out via the DOI here. But they've published this protocol in Protocol Studio, but in the abstract, they've kind of explained what different resources they used to arrive at the protocol that they're publishing. So you can see, it's adapted from this publication, and we can also see that they highlighted other resources that they incorporated into the protocol. So they incorporated these other sample preparation procedures, and then other procedures around these solid phase immobilization beads and exactly where they came from. So they've taken several protocols and kind of combined them into one protocol for a specific purpose. So they've done a really good job with putting that information in the abstract here. Another thing to highlight is that you can publish a protocol on the platform and you don't have to be the author. So you can kind of be the owner of a protocol. You could set someone else as the author. You should always check with people first if you are making them the author of a protocol. But if, someone who kind of contributed to that a protocol originally, so for example, if Russo came along, created a protocols.io account and saw that this was published, they could kind of try and claim authorship of that protocol and be added as an author. So that's an option as well. So to finish off, I'll just highlight some organizations that are encouraging the use of protocols.io. So various journals and publishers. I think actually this list should be quite a lot bigger now. I think it's over 1,000 journals. A lot of Wiley journals recommend in their author guidelines that you put their methods on protocols.io. There's various funders that say, if we're funding your research, you need to be making your methods open, and you can use protocols.io to do that. And then we also have partnerships or provide campus licenses for various different kind of universities and institutes for people to take full advantage of the private collaboration side of protocols.io. And then we do have various resources if you want to kind of dive deeper from what we were able to cover in this webinar. So these are kind of various places you can go to. We're very responsive. You can email us as well at info@protocols.io. And I'd encourage you to check out some other webinars too. So that's all of the information that I had to cover today. So just to finish off, while we're doing the Q&A, I'd like to ask that there is a webinar feedback survey. So if you have any feedback or thoughts on the webinar, what you think we should kind of include for later webinars, what you liked, what you didn't like, please fill out the survey. It helps us improve it for other researchers. It's a few questions. We'd really appreciate that. All right, so we're open to Q&A now. I'll go ahead and stop the recording so people can kind of ask their questions off recording. Thanks.